One of my favorite subscribers, a JTelly786, says, perhaps you could do a video on your views of the afterlife. Well, JTelly786, you certainly don't ask the small questions, do you? This is something I was probably going to wait until later to do, but why not now? After all, do we go to heaven when we die? Or do we go to DU? Or the Elysium Fields? Or do we simply cease to exist and go to oblivion? Or spend the rest of time roaming the earth as some kind of ghost? Or do we spend eternity in some kind of hell, like the airport or on the David Letterman show? It's a really good question. I mean, I think a lot of people are terrified of death. Some of us, well, like myself, are actually kind of morbidly fascinated by it. And perhaps I shouldn't even say morbidly. I'm actually just fascinated. What comes next? A lot of people like to think of the next world, whatever it is, as being better than this one. A lot of them want it to be perfect. They want it to be utopia. They want to think that while they lived a terrible, horrible, awful life here on Earth, they get something better. And that the people that were terrible, awful, and horrible to them will get something significantly worse. I, for one, am not sure I go for any of those concepts, except possibly reincarnation. I do like the idea that we evolve, and that's my one fascination with reincarnation, is this idea that in the next life we simply learn more. The idea of the Christian heaven and hell was always kind of annoying to me. This idea that we lived a life and we sort of had one chance, and we either made it or we didn't make it. And I remember having a long, argument, more like a confrontation almost, with a friend of mine years ago, where he said to me, I just cannot believe the idea that everybody goes to heaven. And I said, well, I'm not necessarily arguing that everybody goes to heaven. I'm simply arguing that maybe everybody has the truth and they get to decide. But the more I thought about that, and the more years I've gone through this omnistic process, I've started to think, I actually prefer the idea of everyone going to heaven. I mean, why not? I mean, isn't it really kind of absurd of us to want all the bad people to go one place and the good people to go another, and this really very selfish concept that we have there? I think it's really much more interesting to think of people as evolving, all of us moving on to something. And when I say more interesting, I'm saying that's literally all we have. We have what is the best concept to us because we don't really know. Now, I'm not completely discounting the people who have near-death experiences and they come back and they say, oh, I went to heaven and I saw this and I saw that. Recently in the news, there's been a little Christian boy who went to heaven and, ironically enough, met Muhammad and had sort of an Islamic experience. I found that rather fascinating. And of course, you have mystics who have meditated and they've seen things. They've come to realize their past reincarnations. And I don't discount any of that. I think it's all possible. It may all be true. It may all be nothing more than a translation of the truth, since none of us really know. And I think it's every bit as absurd to discount all of that stuff as to completely accept it. After all, everybody tends to have something that's slightly different, or considerably different. And for me, I think the answer is what gives me the most meaning. After all, to a lot of atheists, the ones that believe in oblivion, not all of them do. Some atheists do believe in an afterlife. But for the ones that don't, oblivion is a great deal of meaning to them because they feel that their life here is all the meaning there is. So they have to make the most of every single moment of it. And I think that's a perfectly good way to look at it. For me personally, I like to think of there being something because it just makes the most sense to me. When I look at the patterns of the world around me, I see everything continuing. Everything lives, everything dies, yes, but everything does continue. The whole universe continues, and it evolves. It gets better. I look at the human race ever since we were whatever we were before, whether you want to look at it in an evolutionary standpoint or a spiritual standpoint. We have evolved as a society and as a civilization, and we've become, at least in some ways, more and more moral. I mean, look at the fact that in the last 100 years or so, we've started to look at things like ecology. We've come to look at the earth as something to be taken care of. I'm not sure how much we really thought about that before. I mean, for years and years, we didn't necessarily have the ability that we do now to destroy the earth. But now that we do, we've had to think about our responsibility to that. Think about the way animals are viewed. It wasn't really that long ago that if you had a bunch of kittens you didn't want to take care of, you tied them up in a sack and you drowned them. That still probably happens on a lot of farms, way out who knows where. But these days we've started to look at animals as being more and more human. We didn't used to look at them as having fear or even feeling pain, regardless of the fact that they scream and yell if you hurt them. I mean, it's hard to imagine how we ever missed that. And yet, at least as a whole, we did for many hundreds or thousands of years, or at least so it seems. And now we're having to look at all of that as a society and as a people. And so it does seem like we're going somewhere. And if we're going somewhere as a people, then couldn't we personally be going somewhere? And that's how I prefer to think of it. I prefer to think of the evolution of man and the evolution of the universe and the evolution of the earth. I tend to think that we are moving on to better and better things. Now, will we simply reincarnate into another person who learns more? Or will we become a ghost? Or will we go to heaven? I think that there's a couple of different possible answers to that. Again, you know, I'm sort of sticking with this idea that I don't know, but I like to look at it in a certain way. I think for one thing, all of those things could be true. I mean, I've always thought it was very narrow-minded of Christians, for instance, to say, okay, it's got to be this way. We've got to either go to heaven or we sleep until God comes and then we go to heaven, or, you know, we go to heaven or we go to hell. You know, these very precise beliefs. I don't see why some people couldn't become ghosts for whatever reason, and some people couldn't go to heaven, and some people couldn't go to another heaven, depending on their belief system. Some people couldn't reincarnate. You know, why? What is there to say that the human soul, whatever exactly that is, does the same thing at death? Do our decisions or our beliefs have anything to do with that? I just don't see why not. But to me, the most important thing is to find what is meaningful to you and wrap your life around that, because that's what's really important, whether it's oblivion or it's paradise or it's something in between. I mean, I think it would be brilliant if the next life was simply another level, simply another layer of the onion, that we learn a certain amount here in this world, the way this world works, and then we move on to another kind of existence and we learn more things. All of those are possibilities. To me, I kind of go with Peter Pan, the idea that death is the next great adventure. I don't know. I think you'll have to bring your own meaning to it, just like I have. But I guess that's the best I can do for now. I'm the Urban Omnist. Maybe I'll see you in the next life. And guys, please don't forget to support us as much as possible by clicking subscribe, liking us on Facebook and Twitter, and please, 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 please send me those questions right at this address. Thank you very much. Again, I'm the Urban Omnist.